What would you do if a teacher cut your daughter's hair without permission and called it discipline? The classroom always felt colder in the morning. Maybe it was the air conditioning, or maybe it was something else. A tension, a silence, a kind of invisible weight that settled in the corners of the room as soon as Ms. Barbara Whitmore stepped inside. Her voice cut through that silence with precision. Sharp. Clipped. Like every word she spoke was a measurement of how little patience she had left. Today was no different. She stood at the board, explaining literary devices. The chalk in her hand tapped the surface like a ticking clock. Irony. Allegory. Alliteration. Her examples came fast, her tone distant, like she was daring the class to fall behind. Alana Pierce sat in the second row, just far enough from the front to avoid being the first target, but close enough to be seen. Always seen. She took notes. Carefully, her handwriting was neat, each letter rounded, deliberate, controlled. She listened. She tried, but she could feel it again. That feeling. Ms. Whitmore's eyes, flicking toward her with a weight that made her stomach tighten. Not every moment, not even often enough to call it obvious, but often enough that it couldn't be imagined. It hadn't always been this way. Weeks ago, it had started with small things, a tight-lipped smile that never quite reached the eyes. A pause before calling on her, followed by a tone just a little colder than it needed to be. Corrections on her papers that felt more personal than academic. It was always subtle. Too subtle to point to, but not too subtle to feel. That morning, it grew sharper. Halfway through analyzing a poem, Ms. Whitmore closed her textbook with a quiet snap and looked up. Her gaze scanned the room, then stopped. "Miss Pierce," she said. Alana looked up slowly. Her heart skipped. "Yes, ma'am?" "You seem rather distracted today," the teacher said. "Or is it that you believe you've already mastered the material?" There was a pause. The kind of pause that makes a room go still. A few students glanced around awkwardly. Someone shifted in their seat. No one said anything. Alana straightened in her chair. "I'm paying attention," she said quietly. Ms. Whitmore smiled. But it wasn't kind. "I imagine it's hard to focus when you walk around with a name like yours." Alana froze. The classroom did too. The silence that followed was the kind that didn't need explanation. It wasn't what Ms. Whitmore said. It was how she said it. Crisp. Clean. Cold. The kind of cold that leaves frostbite where no one else can see. Then, as if nothing had happened, she turned back to the board and kept teaching. The students pretended to follow along. Alana stared at her notebook. The ink in her pen had stopped moving. Her fingers trembled slightly. She clenched them tight, willing them to stop. She didn't cry. She didn't say a word. But something inside her shifted. At lunch, her friend Sophie noticed. "You okay?" she asked, sliding into the seat beside her. Alana forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired." Sophie watched her for a second, then nodded slowly. She didn't push. That was one thing Alana liked about her. She didn't force the truth before it was ready. The rest of the day passed without incident. But Ms. Whitmore's words echoed in her head like a stone tossed into still water, over and over again. That evening, at dinner, everything looked the same. Her mother, Lydia, talked about work. Her father, Raymond, asked about school. Alana smiled and answered. She didn't mention the comment, didn't mention the tension, didn't mention the tight feeling in her chest that hadn't left since third period. After dinner, she and her dad trained in the backyard. Martial arts had always been their thing. It was something that belonged to just the two of them. A space where words didn't matter as much as breath and balance. They moved in rhythm. Block. Step, turn, strike. But even there, Alana was off. "You're distracted," Raymond said gently as he stepped back, lowering his stance. Alana shrugged. "Just school stuff." He nodded, not pressing. Instead, he showed her a new sequence, a combination of moves they hadn't practiced before. He moved slowly, patiently, letting her catch her breath. And for a while, she did. That night, Alana lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The room was quiet, except for the soft ticking of the clock on her nightstand. She tried to shake the comment, tried to tell herself it was nothing, just a passing remark. Just a teacher, having a bad day. But she couldn't. She had never been disrespectful. Never disruptive. She followed instructions, turned in her homework on time. She did everything right. And yet, something about her still felt wrong in that classroom. It wasn't just the words. It was the way they were delivered, the way the room responded, the way no one said anything afterward. Tomorrow was another day, but tonight she knew. Something had changed, and she wasn't sure how much longer she could keep pretending it hadn't. The next day came like all the others. Alana sat in her usual seat, her notebook open, her pen ready. She didn't speak unless called on. She kept her posture straight, her eyes forward. It was the kind of behavior teachers usually liked. But not in room 214, not under Ms. Barbara Whitmore. That morning, Ms. Whitmore walked in exactly on time. Her heels clicked against the tile in a rhythm the class had come to expect. She set her books down, smoothed the front of her blazer, and turned to the chalkboard. There was no good morning. There rarely was. Today's lesson was about symbolism. Ms. Whitmore began with examples from classic texts, her voice calm but cold, her eyes scanning the classroom like searchlights. When she paused to ask a question, Alana raised her hand. Not too fast, not too high, just enough to show she was engaged. Ms. Whitmore looked at her, then past her. "Anyone else?" she asked. The silence that followed wasn't unusual, but it was heavy. Alana lowered her hand slowly. Moments later, another student answered, incorrectly. Ms. Whitmore corrected them with a nod, then gave the same answer Alana had been ready to give, word for word. The lesson moved on. The next day, it happened again. And again. Each time, a small, almost invisible moment, but together they began to stack up like stones on Alana's chest. Her name was still being called in class. But when she answered correctly, Ms. Whitmore's smile tightened, her tone clipped. The praise, when given, came with a twist. "Well, I didn't expect you to catch that." Or, "Even a broken clock is right twice a day." Each comment was dressed in professionalism, but the edge was there, sharpened, intentional. Outside the classroom, things didn't feel much better. In the cafeteria, Alana found herself laughing less. She picked at her lunch more often. She doodled in the corners of her notebook instead of joining in conversations. The noise around her felt louder, and her own voice felt smaller. Her friend Sophie noticed. "You've been quiet lately," she said one afternoon, sliding into the seat beside her. Alana shrugged, keeping her eyes on her tray. "Just tired." Ethan, sitting across from them, looked between the two girls. He hesitated, then said it. "It's Miss Whitmore, isn't it?" Alana looked up, startled. "You think she's being hard on me?" Sophie gave a short, quiet laugh. "No, we know she is." Alana didn't respond. She didn't know how. It wasn't that she didn't see it. It was that she didn't know what to do with it. What would she say? That every day felt like walking a tightrope. That every interaction with Ms. Whitmore was a test she wasn't allowed to pass? She had been taught to stay composed, to stay respectful, to work harder and prove herself through discipline. But it didn't feel like discipline anymore. It felt like something else. That week, an announcement was made about a school-wide writing contest. The theme was resilience. Ms. Whitmore brought it up during English, her tone light, but her eyes locked on Alana. "Some of you might think you already know what resilience means," she said. "But let's be clear, resilience isn't inherited. It's earned." Alana didn't say anything. She just stared at her desk. After class, she considered not entering. But that night, sitting at the kitchen table while her parents cleaned up after dinner, she opened her laptop and started typing. Writing had always helped her think. It was the one place where she didn't have to be quiet, didn't have to ask permission. Her thoughts could stretch out and take up space. She wrote about what it meant to feel invisible and too visible at the same time. She didn't mention names. She didn't have to. A week later, she was announced as one of the finalists. She didn't feel proud. She felt cornered. The next day, when Miss Whitmore handed back the class's essays, she placed Alana's paper on her desk with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I suppose it helps to have a last name that opens doors," she said. The comment hit harder than the rest, because this one didn't pretend to be professional. Alana kept her eyes on the paper, her fingers curled into fists beneath the desk. Her face remained still, but inside, something cracked a little deeper. From that day forward, Ms. Whitmore began bringing up the school's dress code more frequently. Her comments were general, but her eyes always settled on Alana. It was her hair, long, dark, smooth. It fell past her shoulders in soft waves. Alana had always worn it tied back or brushed neat. It had never been an issue before, but now it was. One afternoon, as the class packed up at the end of the period, Ms. Whitmore's voice cut through the noise. "Miss Pierce." A word. Alana's stomach dropped. She waited until the others had filed out, her backpack over one shoulder. Miss Whitmore didn't look up from the papers she was shuffling. "I've noticed your hair's gotten rather long," she said casually. "You're aware of the school's grooming policy, I assume?" Alana nodded, unsure where this was going. "Miss..." Whitmore finally looked up. "I would hate for it to become a distraction. For you or for others." Alana swallowed. "I didn't think," Ms. Whitmore smiled. "Of course you didn't." That was the end of the conversation, but not the end of the unease. It followed Alana into the hallway, into her next class, into the quiet ride home. She didn't tell her parents. She didn't want them to worry. She didn't want her father to know. That night, she stood in front of her mirror again. Her hair framed her face like a curtain, soft but heavy. She brushed it slowly, her eyes fixed on her reflection. Tomorrow would be another day of sitting straight, speaking softly, trying not to draw attention. Another day of shrinking. The days that followed blurred into each other like smudged ink on a page. Alana woke up every morning with the same weight in her chest. It wasn't heavy enough to keep her in bed, but it made every step feel slower. Every moment more effortful. She still brushed her hair, still tied it back, still packed her bag and walked into school with her head held high. But inside, something had begun to bend. She tried to pretend nothing had changed. But everything had. The classroom didn't feel like a place of learning anymore. It felt like a stage. A quiet stage where every movement she made, every word she said, was measured and marked. Ms. Whitmore had perfected the art of veiled criticism. She never shouted, never raised her voice. She didn't need to. Her power came in pauses, in the way she looked at Alana when calling on someone else, in the way she phrased compliments that weren't really compliments. When Alana answered correctly, the response came with surprise. "Well, I wasn't expecting that." Daughter says, when she stumbled, the silence was longer, the air felt tighter, and the disapproval in Mrs. Whitmore's gaze pressed heavier than any red mark on a page. It was also in the way her eyes lingered on Alana's hair, the way her lips pressed into a line when Alana spoke. The remarks came quietly. "You're lucky, you know. Some of us have to work twice as hard for half as much. Well, you must have it so easy, being who you are." They weren't direct, but they were deliberate. Other students had started to notice. Some still smiled at Alana in the hallways. Others had grown distant. Their eyes darted away when she passed, like they weren't sure what to believe, or worse, like they did believe, but didn't want to be involved. A few began to echo Ms. Whitmore. "She thinks she's better than us. She only gets attention because of her dad." Those whispers followed her through the halls. They slipped under classroom doors and into cafeteria corners. They lived in the space between glances, in the awkward pauses before conversations resumed when she walked by. She wanted to ignore it. She had been taught to rise above. But it was relentless, like water against stone, a quiet erosion. Her friends noticed the difference. One afternoon at lunch, Sophie sat down next to her, tray in hand, concern in her eyes. "You've been quiet lately," she said, her voice soft. Alana poked at her food without looking up. "Just school." Ethan, across the table, looked at her. "It's Miss Whitmore, isn't it?" Alana's eyes flicked up in surprise. She hadn't realized it was that obvious. "She's hard on everyone," Alana said, though the words felt like they belonged to someone else, not her. Sophie shook her head gently. "No, she's hard on you." Alana didn't reply, because deep down she knew it was true, but admitting it out loud felt like giving it power. That week, the pressure in English class reached a new height. The writing contest had been announced days earlier, and Alana's name had already appeared on the finalists' list. It should have felt good. But instead, it felt like a trap. On the day the results were posted, Ms. Whitmore handed back essays to the class. She moved from desk to desk with a tight-lipped smile. When she reached Alana, she paused. "I suppose it helps to have a last name that opens doors," she said lightly. Alana kept her eyes on her desk. The words landed like ice against her spine. She didn't respond. She couldn't. Her jaw tightened, and her fingers curled slightly under the desk. It was the first time she felt something sharper than shame. It was anger, but it didn't stay long. because soon after Ms. Whitmore shifted focus. Dress code. She began to mention it more often. Subtly, casually, almost always when Alana walked into the room. It's important to follow the rules. No one is above the policy. Discipline applies to everyone. She never used Alana's name, but her eyes did. They said everything. At home, Alana remained silent. Her mother still asked about her day. Her father still checked on her schoolwork. And Alana still smiled, still nodded, still gave the same answer every night. It's fine. Because the idea of telling them felt like turning a crack into a fracture. Until one afternoon, everything changed. Alana had stayed late after school to ask another teacher a question. As she turned a corner near the faculty lounge, she heard a voice. Ms. Whitmore. It was unmistakable. She wasn't yelling, just speaking, but her voice was laced with something bitter. She thinks the world owes her something because of her last name. Someone needs to teach that girl she's not special. Alana froze. The words weren't meant for her, but they found her anyway. She turned and walked the other way, her feet moving on instinct. Her backpack felt heavier than usual, and her eyes burned, though no tears came. That night, she stood in front of her mirror again. Her long hair fell past her shoulders. It framed her face, softened the sharpness in her cheekbones, gave her something to hide behind. She ran a brush through it slowly. Her reflection stared back, calm but unfamiliar. She didn't feel special. She felt small, alone, trapped. The next day, she would walk back into room 214. She would take her seat, and something, deep inside, would begin to crack. The morning started like any other. Alana sat at the breakfast table, a bowl of cereal slowly growing soggy in front of her. She stirred it without eating. Her mother moved around the kitchen, humming softly to the radio. Her father was reading the news on his tablet, sipping coffee with the same calm routine he always carried. Everything looked normal. Everything felt wrong. She hadn't told them. Not about the comments. Not about the glances. Not about what she overheard in the hallway. It wasn't because she didn't trust them. It was because the words were hard to say out loud, and because some part of her still believed she could handle it on her own. But that belief was wearing thin. At school, she walked the halls with her head down. Her steps felt heavier than usual. Students passed her with their usual chatter, but some conversations paused as she walked by. It wasn't loud, it wasn't clear, but she could feel it. By the time she stepped into room 214, her hands were already tense, her shoulders stiff. Ms. Whitmore stood at the front of the class, her posture rigid, her expression unreadable. The bell rang. Students settled in. Books opened, pens tapped against desks. The lesson began. Poetry analysis, tone and subtext, Ms. Whitmore spoke smoothly, her words flowing with practiced control. Alana wrote as best she could, but her mind kept drifting. Her fingers gripped the pen tighter. Her stomach turned, then the moment came. Ms. Whitmore closed her textbook with a quiet snap and looked up. Everyone pack up your things, she said. The class hesitated. It's not lunch yet, someone whispered, but no one questioned her. One by one, students began gathering their things. Zippers buzzed, chairs scraped, backpacks swung onto shoulders. The room filled with quiet movement. Alana was halfway through, putting her notebook away, when Ms. Whitmore's voice cut through the air. Miss Pierce, stay behind. Her hands froze. She looked up. Every student turned to glance at her. Some looked curious. Others avoided her eyes. Sophie paused at the door. Their eyes met. Alana gave her a small, tight smile. It didn't reach her eyes. When the door closed and the room emptied, the silence that remained felt thick. Too thick. Ms. Whitmore didn't speak right away. She moved slowly from behind her desk, her heels tapping against the floor. She stopped in front of Alana's desk and folded her arms. "You and I need to have a conversation," she said. Alana nodded, unsure of what would come next. "I've been patient," Ms. Whitmore began, "but it seems you still haven't understood what this classroom is about." Alana blinked. "I don't understand." Miss Whitmore smiled, thin, controlled. "No, I don't imagine you do." She stepped closer. "You walk in here every day with that hair falling over your shoulders, drawing attention to yourself, acting as if the rules don't apply to you." Alana felt her throat tighten. You're not what, trying to stand out, Mrs.?" Whitmore's voice sharpened. "Then why is it that you insist on ignoring the dress code? Why is it that every time you step into this room, you bring your father's name with you, like a shield?" Alana tried to speak, but no sound came out. Ms. Whitmore turned away, walked back toward her desk. "Enough." She opened a drawer. Alana's breath caught in her chest when she saw what the teacher pulled out. Scissors. A plain, school-issued pair of scissors, but in that moment, they looked like something else entirely. Ms. Whitmore walked back toward her, holding the scissors calmly. "I'm going to help you," she said. Her voice was soft, but it wasn't kind. "I'm going to teach you that the rules apply to everyone." Alana stood frozen. "You can't," she whispered. Whitmore tilted her head. "I can." Alana didn't move, but her body screamed to run. "Sit down," Ms. Whitmore ordered. Her voice had changed, sharper now, darker. Alana's legs moved before she could think. She sank slowly into her seat, her backpack slipping to the floor. "Ms." Whitmore stood over her, her eyes focused, her grip steady. "I would hate for your hair to distract from your potential." Then she reached forward. Her fingers curled around a section of Alana's hair. Alana flinched. "Please don't." But the sound of the scissors came first. Soft, final, snip. A strand of hair fell to the floor, then another, and another. Each cut was deliberate, each cut louder than the last. Alana stared straight ahead, her face blank, her fingers gripping the sides of her desk until her knuckles turned white. She felt everything and nothing. When it was over, Ms. Whitmore stepped back. She dropped the scissors onto the desk with a soft clatter. "There." Her voice was even. "Now you look like everyone else." Alana didn't speak. She didn't cry. She just sat still, her breath shallow, her chest hollow. "You're dismissed," Ms. Whitmore said. Alana stood slowly. Her legs trembled. She grabbed her backpack, not looking at the floor, not looking at the strands of her hair scattered around her like fallen leaves. She walked to the door, her eyes burning. Not here. Not yet. Outside, the hallway was empty. She kept walking. Through the corridors, out the front doors, across the parking lot. She didn't stop until she was half a block away. And then the tears came. Fast. Hot. Blinding. She pulled up the hood of her sweatshirt, trying to hide what was left of her hair. But it wasn't the hair she was hiding, it was everything else. When she finally reached home, her hands shook as she unlocked the door. Her mother called from the kitchen. Alana didn't answer. She went straight upstairs and closed her bedroom door. She stood in front of her mirror. She looked at herself. And for the first time in her life, she didn't recognize the person looking back. Her hair was uneven, jagged, a mess. But that wasn't what broke her. It was the knowledge that someone had taken something from her. Not just hair, but control and dignity and voice. She reached up and touched her head. Then she lowered her hand. Somewhere deep inside her chest, beneath the hurt, something else stirred. It wasn't sadness, it wasn't shame, it was something colder. Sharper. It was anger. The house was quiet when Alana stepped inside. Too quiet. Her shoes made almost no sound on the hardwood floor as she moved past the living room and into the hallway. Her mother's voice called out from the kitchen, cheerful and familiar. But Alana didn't answer. She climbed the stairs slowly, her hand trailing along the wall, each step heavier than the last. Her backpack slipped from her shoulder and hit the floor beside her bedroom door. She didn't bother picking it up. Inside, the room looked the same, but everything felt different. She walked to the mirror and stopped. The reflection was still hers, but not really. Her hair had always been long, carefully brushed, soft at the edges. It wasn't just about style, it had been part of her. A small kind of shield, something that gave her comfort in a place where she never quite fit. Now, it was uneven. Chopped. Jagged. It looked like it had been torn apart by someone who didn't care what was lost in the process. She reached up, slowly, and ran her fingers through it. They caught on the shorter sections, the torn ends. She didn't cry. Not at first. But then her hand dropped to her side, and she saw the look in her own eyes. And that's when the tears came, quick and deep. They didn't stream down her cheeks. They fell in quiet, broken drops, the kind that burn more than they comfort. She curled up on her bed and stayed there for hours. She didn't sleep. She didn't move. The weight on her chest wouldn't let her. Downstairs, the world moved on. Her mother cooked dinner. Her father came home. The clatter of dishes, the buzz of a newscaster on television, the normal sounds of a house that didn't yet know what had happened. When she finally came down, the sky outside had already darkened. The corners of the windows glowed faintly with the last stretch of evening light. Her sweatshirt hood was pulled low over her head, the fabric soft against the side of her face. She walked into the kitchen like a ghost. Her mother turned first. She smiled. But the smile didn't last. Her eyes landed on Alana's face, then on the hood, and then on the expression underneath. She stopped moving. "Sweetheart," she said gently. Alana didn't answer. Her father looked up from his seat at the table. He put down his fork. His brow furrowed as he studied her. And for a moment, no one moved. Then Alana did something she hadn't planned. She reached up and pulled down her hood. The silence that followed was instant. Heavy. Crushing. Her mother gasped, a hand flying to her mouth. Her eyes widened in disbelief, then softened in a way only a mother's could, full of instinct and fear and fierce, immediate protection. Her father didn't speak. Not yet. He just stared. his face unreadable, his eyes locked on his daughter's hair, the uneven edges, the clear marks of something done, not chosen. Alana looked down. "She cut it," she whispered. Her voice cracked. "Ms. Whitmore." "She made me stay after class, said my hair was a distraction, then she just—" She couldn't finish. Her mother stepped forward, one hand reaching gently to Alana's back. Her father stood slowly, deliberately. He crossed the kitchen in 2 long strides and knelt in front of his daughter. His hands rested lightly on her shoulders. His eyes scanned her face, the short locks around her cheeks, the corners of her eyes. "What happened?" he asked, his voice low and steady, but vibrating with something powerful underneath. Alana tried to explain. She stumbled through the words, the comments, the warnings, the humiliation. She told them how Ms. Whitmore had taken out the scissors, how she hadn't moved, how her classmates had already left the room, how it all happened so fast, and yet slowly enough that she would remember every second for the rest of her life. Her father didn't interrupt. He listened. When she was done, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't swear. He didn't look angry, but the air around him changed. He stood up and pulled out a chair. "Sit," he said softly. She sat. He walked to the counter, picked up his phone, and began to dial. His voice remained calm, measured. But each word was precise and final. First, the district office. Then the superintendent, then the school principal. Each call was handled the same way. Clear, controlled, unmistakably serious. Alana sat at the table, watching him. Her mother moved around the kitchen in silence, her movements sharp and purposeful. When the last call ended, her father placed the phone down carefully. He turned to face them both. "Tomorrow morning," he said, his voice firm, "we go to the school." That night, her mother stood in the doorway of her room. "You want to talk about it?" she asked gently. Alana shook her head, arms wrapped around her knees. Her mother crossed the room, kissed her forehead, and whispered softly, "We're going to make this right." When she was alone again, Alana sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the dark window. She didn't feel better, but she didn't feel alone anymore, and for the first time since it happened, that was enough. The morning came earlier than usual. Alana sat in the back seat of the car, her hands curled in her lap, twisting the hem of her sleeve over and over. Outside the windows, the world was just beginning to wake up. The sky was still pale, the street empty, the quiet hum of the engine filled the space between her and her parents. Her father drove without speaking, his expression calm, focused. Her mother sat in the passenger seat, glancing back at her from time to time. Her eyes said everything. "You're not alone? We believe you." They didn't need to say it out loud anymore. When they pulled into the school parking lot, Alana's stomach turned. The building looked the same bricks, the same flag fluttering in the morning breeze. But nothing felt familiar. Her father turned off the ignition and sat quietly for a moment. Then he turned to face her. "This isn't your fault," he said, his voice low and steady. Alana nodded slowly, her throat too tight to speak. Her mother reached over and took her hand, gave it a gentle squeeze. Then the three of them stepped out of the car and walked toward the building. They moved as one, unshaken, deliberate. The front office staff looked up in surprise when they entered. One receptionist blinked, clearly recognizing Raymond Pierce. Whispers followed within seconds. The principal, Mr. Nolan Harris, appeared quickly. His expression shifted the moment he saw Alana. From polite confusion to something closer to concern. "Mr. Pierce," he greeted, "I just heard there was something that happened yesterday. I was planning to—" Raymond didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "My daughter was assaulted by a member of your staff," he said. The word landed like a stone. "And I want to know what you're going to do about it." Mr. Harris looked stunned. He glanced at Alana, then at Lydia, and back to Raymond. "At 2-2, only just got a summary this morning," he said. "I wasn't aware of the full extent." "You are now," Raymond replied calmly. They were ushered into the principal's office. The door closed behind them with a quiet click. Alana sat between her parents on the long couch across from Mr. Harris's desk. She didn't say anything. Her hands were folded in her lap, her shoulders drawn in. But her gaze was steady. Her father began. He laid out everything. Not just the haircut, not just the scissors. He spoke about the weeks of veiled comments, the targeted corrections, the way Ms. Whitmore had treated his daughter as if her last name was a weapon instead of a responsibility. He spoke about how Alana had tried to stay quiet, how she had tried to follow every rule, and then he played the video. A recording from another parent. A student in the class had captured a short clip on their phone, just a few seconds. Just enough to see Ms. Whitmore standing over Alana, the scissors in hand. The sound of hair falling, the tension in the air, the silence that followed. When the video ended, the room was silent. Mr. Harris leaned back in his chair, his face pale. "This is completely unacceptable," he said finally. "I had no idea it had gone this far." Raymond's eyes didn't waver. "I expect a formal investigation, immediate disciplinary action, and a public apology." He paused. "And I will be contacting the school board." "And my legal team," Mr. Harris nodded slowly. "You have my word. This will be handled properly." When they finally stepped out of the office, the air in the hallway felt different. Lighter, like something had cracked open. Students were beginning to arrive. Some paused when they saw Alana. A few looked at her and quickly looked away. A few whispered. She didn't pull up her hood this time. Outside, the sky had turned from pale blue to full daylight. Her father stopped at the bottom of the steps and turned to her. "This isn't over yet," he said, "but we're going to make sure it ends the right way." Alana nodded. And for the first time in days, she believed him. That afternoon, the calls began. Parents, teachers, journalists. The story moved faster than she could have imagined. First on student forums, then parent groups, then local news. A blurry clip of the video made its way online. People shared it. People reacted, some with shock, some with fury. Some with the kind of recognition that came from knowing what it feels like to be treated unfairly and told to sit quietly through it. Alana didn't answer every message. She didn't need to. She let her father handle the noise. All she cared about was that someone had finally listened. That the thing that had happened, the thing that had broken her, was no longer just a whisper in a hallway. It had a name now. It had consequences. That night, she sat at the kitchen table with a mug of tea she barely touched. Her mother moved around quietly, setting plates back into the cabinets. Her father stood by the window, talking on the phone in a voice just low enough not to hear. The house was still. But not like before. It was the stillness that comes right after a storm begins, not the end. The beginning of change. Alana sat in silence, her thoughts spinning, but not with fear, with something steadier. Something stronger. She didn't know yet what the next day would bring, or the next week. But she knew this much. She was no longer shrinking. She was standing. The morning of the hearing came heavy and silent. Alana sat at the kitchen table, her fingers wrapped around a mug of tea she hadn't touched. The walls of the house felt too still, like they were holding their breath. Her parents moved around her with quiet efficiency, exchanging short glances, soft steps, and unsaid thoughts. In the past 2 days, the world outside their home had shifted. The video had circulated. The outrage had grown. And now, the district had called for a formal school board hearing, a meeting that would include administrators, teachers, parents, even community observers. It was no longer just a school issue. It had become a public one. Her father had told her she didn't have to go, that he and her mother would speak for her, that her presence wasn't required, but Alana had shaken her head then, just once. Quietly, "I want to be there." Now, in the car, she sat quietly in the back seat again. The streets passed by in slow motion. Everything looked familiar, but felt distant, like she was seeing it all through a window, thick with fog. When they arrived at the school, a small crowd had already formed outside. Parents, students, even a few reporters, cameras in hand, scanning the faces of everyone who walked by. Alana pulled her hood a little lower, her steps steady between her parents. Her mother's hand rested gently on her shoulder. Her father walked with a kind of focus that made people part before them without a word. Inside, the meeting was being held in a large conference room near the front office. Rows of folding chairs had been set up. A long table at the front held nameplates, water bottles, and quiet tension. The school board was already seated. So was Mr. Harris, the principal, and at the far end of the table sat Ms. Whitmore. She looked smaller than usual, her hands folded neatly, her face unreadable. She didn't glance toward Alana, not even once. The room slowly filled with teachers, staff members, and a few parents who had been granted permission to attend. A few older students sat along the back wall, hushed and stiff in their chairs. The clock ticked. When the chair of the school board stood, the room fell still. The hearing began with formalities, a statement of purpose, a reminder of procedure. Then a summary of what had been reported, what had been submitted, what was being reviewed. Alana barely heard it. Her ears were full of the sound of her heartbeat. Her father was the first to speak. His voice was calm, his words steady. He laid out the timeline, the comments, the shifts in tone, the dismissiveness, the slow unraveling of safety in a classroom that should have protected his daughter. He didn't shout. He didn't accuse. He simply laid out the facts like pieces of a puzzle, each one locking into place without room for denial. Then he played the video again. The same short clip, the same moment caught in pixels. Ms. Whitmore, the scissors, Alana. Still, silent, the hair falling. The room absorbed it in silence. There were no gasps, just quiet shock, like a ripple held under glass. Mr. Harris followed, acknowledging that the school had failed to intervene earlier, that the signs had been present, that the system had waited too long to act. Then Mrs. Whitmore was asked to speak. She rose slowly. Her blouse was neatly pressed. Her voice calm. "I never intended to harm Miss Pierce," she began. Her words were carefully chosen. Measured. Polished. "My actions were motivated by a desire to enforce consistency and discipline. I believed certain students felt they were exempt from rules applied to everyone else." Her gaze flicked toward Alana just once, then back to the papers in front of her. "I understand now that my actions may have been misinterpreted. And for any distress caused, I regret the outcome." Her voice didn't tremble, but it didn't soften either. It was the kind of apology that filled a requirement but left a wound untouched. Then the floor was opened to others. One by one, parents stood. A mother spoke about how her daughter had witnessed the incident and had come home shaken, unsure how to talk about what she saw. A father talked about the culture of silence in schools, about the fear students feel when adults abuse their authority. Others spoke about race, about power, about how trauma doesn't always come from shouting, but sometimes from calm voices that say cruel things with a smile. And then the chair turned toward Alana. "Miss Pierce, is there anything you'd like to say?" Her breath caught. She hadn't prepared a speech. She hadn't planned this moment. But she stood anyway. The room felt larger than it had moments ago. Her voice, when it came, was quiet. But it carried. "I never wanted special treatment," she said. "I just wanted to learn. To be in a classroom where I felt safe, where I felt like my work mattered, where I didn't have to prove I belonged every time I raised my hand." She paused. Her eyes flicked to Ms. Whitmore. "I know my last name gets attention, but that's not who I am. I didn't ask for a spotlight. I didn't ask to be judged by it, and I definitely didn't ask to be punished for it." Her throat tightened. But she kept going. "When she cut my hair, it wasn't about policy. It wasn't about rules. It was about control, about making me small." She looked down at her hands, then back at the board. "I just want to be seen as myself, not as a name, not as a headline. Just me." She sat down. The room was silent again. This time, not with tension, but with recognition. The board deliberated privately. It didn't take long. By the end of the hour, a decision was read aloud. Mrs. Whitmore's contract would be terminated immediately. A formal apology would be issued. Staff would undergo new training. Policies would be reviewed. When the hearing adjourned, people stood slowly, voices low, faces serious. Outside, the crowd had grown. Reporters waited. Questions flew, but Alana kept walking, her parents at her sides, her eyes forward. She didn't answer any questions. She didn't need to, because for the first time in weeks, something inside her was still. And it wasn't fear. It was relief. 3 days after the hearing, Alana returned to school. She had insisted on it. Her parents had gently suggested more time, a few extra days, maybe a full week. But Alana knew the longer she stayed away, the harder it would be to come back. She had lost enough already. She wasn't about to let fear take anything else. That morning, she stood in front of her closet longer than usual. Not because she didn't know what to wear, but because everything in her felt different now, like she had outgrown who she used to be in that building. She pulled on a simple white shirt, dark jeans, clean sneakers. Her hair, still shorter than she liked, had been trimmed by a professional after Ms. Whitmore's rough cut. It wasn't perfect. Some edges were still uneven, but it no longer looked like a wound. It looked like a beginning. She didn't put on a hood this time. She looked in the mirror, took a slow breath, and walked downstairs. Her father was waiting by the door. He didn't say much, just gave her a look, steady, warm, proud. Her mother handed her a packed lunch and brushed a loose strand of hair away from her cheek. "You ready?" she asked softly. Alana nodded. "Yeah, I think so." The drive to school was quiet, but not heavy, not like before. It was a quiet that felt like calm before movement, not silence before collapse. When they pulled into the school lot, Alana stepped out on her own. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The walk toward the front entrance felt longer than she remembered. Conversations paused when she passed. Some students stared. Some looked away. Some tried to meet her eyes, but couldn't quite hold the contact. She kept walking. Her shoulders back, her gaze steady. She wasn't trying to look brave. She just didn't want to look down anymore. When she reached her locker, Sophie was already there. She turned quickly when she heard footsteps. "Hey," she said. "Hey," Alana answered. They looked at each other for a moment. No words, just something quiet and mutual. Sophie reached out and gave her a hug, brief but real. "You good?" she asked. Alana nodded. "Getting there." Ryan showed up a minute later. He didn't say anything dramatic. Just gave a simple nod and said, "Good to have you back." That was enough. They didn't talk about the hearing. They didn't bring up Ms. Whitmore. They didn't need to. Their presence was the conversation. The school day moved like slow water. Each hallway felt unfamiliar and familiar at the same time. Some teachers smiled at her too warmly. Some avoided eye contact altogether. A few students whispered as she walked by, but not in the same way as before. The tone had changed. Caution had replaced cruelty. Curiosity had replaced condescension. Alana didn't let it stick. She focused on getting from one class to the next, on taking notes. On breathing, she was doing it, one step at a time. During lunch, she sat with Sophie and Ryan again. Other students looked over occasionally, but didn't approach. She wasn't ready for that. She wasn't sure she wanted it, but at least she wasn't sitting alone. That afternoon, she walked past room 214. The door was closed. Ms. Whitmore's nameplate had been removed. The room looked hollow, like a stage after a play had ended. The kind where the set remains, but the script has been torn down and thrown away. Alana didn't stop. She kept moving. After school, she walked out alone. The air was crisp, the sky wide and blue above the parking lot. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel watched. She just felt present. When she got home, her mom was in the kitchen, humming to herself, chopping vegetables for dinner. Her dad came home an hour later, placed his keys on the table, and smiled at her. "You did it," he said simply. She didn't reply, just nodded, her chest full, but quiet. That night, in her room, she pulled out her notebook, the one she hadn't touched since before the hearing. She flipped past old assignments, past pages filled with notes from a classroom that had never really welcomed her, past the moments she had once tried to erase with neat lines and perfect margins. She stopped on a blank page. She stared at it for a long time. Then she picked up her pen and began to write. Not for a grade, not for approval, but for herself. She didn't know yet what the next weeks would bring. She didn't know who would stay distant and who would come closer, but she knew one thing. She had walked back into the place that tried to silence her. And she hadn't whispered. She had stood, even if her voice shook. She had stood. The flyer went up a week after she returned to school. Bright red letters. White background. A list of dates and times. Annual district karate tournament registration now open. Alana paused when she saw it posted on the bulletin board outside the gym. Her name wasn't on it. Not yet. She had told herself she wouldn't compete this year. Not after everything. She didn't feel like she had the focus, the strength, the presence. But her eyes lingered on the paper longer than she expected. Later that day, Sophie asked her about it. "You thinking about signing up?" she said casually as they walked down the hall. Alana shrugged. "Not really, just looking." Sophie didn't push. That night at dinner, Alana brought it up. It was a quiet moment, between bites of rice and vegetables, the TV murmuring softly in the background. "I'm thinking about entering the tournament," she said, not looking up. Her father set his fork down. He didn't speak right away. When she finally glanced at him, his eyes were already on her. "You sure?" he asked. She nodded. "I want to—" "I need to." He didn't ask why. He just nodded once. "Then we train tomorrow." The next afternoon, they were in the backyard again. Same mat, same rhythm. But something had changed. Alana didn't move like someone carrying fear anymore. She moved like someone shaking it off, slowly, piece by piece. Her father watched her with the quiet attention of someone who knew exactly what pain looked like, even when hidden in perfect form. "You're tighter in your shoulders," he said after the third round of drills. "You're holding your breath too long between combinations." Alana exhaled and nodded. "I know, I'll fix it." They didn't talk about the school, they didn't talk about the hearing, but it was all there. In the way she stepped forward instead of backward, in the way her foot planted more firmly into the mat, in the way she raised her arms just a little higher than before. For the next 2 weeks, she trained every afternoon. No audience, no judgment. Just her and her father. The tournament came quickly. The school gym buzzed with energy the morning of the event. Banners hung from the walls. Bleachers filled with students, parents, teachers. The scent of polished wood floors and sweat and something fried from the concession stand filled the air. Alana stood in the warm-up area, adjusting her belt. Her uniform felt crisp against her skin, her belt tight around her waist. Her hair, short and brushed back, no longer hung like a shield. It revealed everything: her eyes, her jawline, the new steadiness in her posture. Her name was called. She stepped onto the mat. The lights overhead were bright, but not blinding. She bowed. Her opponent, taller and older, bowed back. The referee gave the signal, and it began. The match was quick, but not rushed. Alana moved with precision, her strikes clean. Her footwork deliberate. Every block flowed into the next like water, curling over rocks soft but powerful. She didn't think about misses. Whitmore. She didn't think about the classroom. She didn't even think about the crowd. She just moved, one moment at a time. When the final point was scored and the referee raised her arm, the gym filled with applause. She didn't hear it clearly. She didn't smile right away. She just stood there in the middle of the mat, breathing, grounded. Her father was in the front row, arms crossed, a small smile pulling at the edge of his mouth. Her mother clapped beside him, eyes bright. When Alana stepped off the mat, Sophie and Ryan were already waiting. "You were amazing," Sophie said. "That last combination?" "You hit it clean," Ryan added. Alana nodded, still catching her breath. "Thanks." But her voice was different now. It wasn't tired, it wasn't small, it was steady. Later that night, as she stood in front of the mirror at home, she touched the medal hanging around her neck. It wasn't about winning, it was about showing up. Not for the judges, not for her father, not even for the classmates who now looked at her differently. For herself, for the girl who sat in silence in room 214, for the girl who stood in front of the school board, voice shaking but heart steady, for the girl who was learning to move again, not just in practice, but in life. She set the medal down on her nightstand. Then she looked at her reflection, brushed a hand through her short hair, and smiled. Not big, not bold, but enough. The sun was already setting by the time Alana stepped out of the gym. The cool evening air brushed against her cheeks. The sky above had shifted into streaks of violet and soft orange. Her parents walked beside her, quiet and calm. She held her gear bag in one hand, the edge of her tournament medal peeking from the top zipper. They didn't say much, and that was okay. Some victories don't need to be talked about. Outside, the school grounds were nearly empty. Just a few students lingering, still buzzing from the matches, a coach locking up equipment, the sound of someone laughing in the distance. Alana took a long breath. It smelled like grass and sweat and early spring. She felt tired, but not drained. She felt full. They reached the car. Her father opened the door for her, and she slid into the back seat. As they pulled away, she looked out the window, watching the building shrink behind her. It looked different now. Not smaller, just less powerful. Less like something that could break her. At home, she showered, changed into soft clothes, and curled up on the couch under a blanket. The TV played something in the background, but she wasn't watching. Her mother brought her a warm mug of tea and kissed the top of her head. "You were incredible today," she said. Alana smiled faintly. "I didn't think I could do it," she admitted. "You didn't just do it," her mother said. "You owned it." Her father nodded quietly from the armchair. He didn't say anything, but Alana could feel the pride in his silence. Later that night, in her room, she sat at her desk with the light turned low. She opened her notebook again. The pages from weeks before still held the faint curve of her handwriting, the ink still clear, though the girl who had written those lines felt far away. She flipped to the last page and began to write. She didn't write about the haircut. She didn't write about the classroom or the hearing or the whispers in the hall. She wrote about how it felt to stand in the center of a mat and not flinch, how it felt to breathe in without apology, how it felt to not shrink even when eyes were watching. She wrote not for a teacher, not for a grade, but because it was hers, her voice, her rhythm, her peace. In the weeks that followed, life didn't snap back to normal. It shifted. Gently, slowly, honestly. People still looked at her in the halls, some with respect, some with discomfort. Some still unsure what to say. Teachers treated her differently, a little more cautious, a little more aware. the school held a professional development day about student dignity and educator accountability. Anonymous reporting boxes appeared outside counselor offices. None of it erased what had happened, but it mattered, and not just for her. For others who had watched from the corners, who had whispered their support but hadn't known how to speak up. Some of them began speaking now. Not with protests or loud declarations, but with questions, with boundaries, with clarity. Sophie stayed by her side, Ryan too. They didn't treat her like she had survived something. They treated her like she had lived through it, like she was still living. And that, somehow, made all the difference. There were hard days too. The sound of scissors on paper sometimes made her shoulders tense. Passing room 214 still sent a pulse of cold through her chest, but it didn't stop her. She kept walking. She kept breathing. She kept showing up. At home, the dinners returned to the usual rhythm. Light conversation, occasional jokes from her dad, her mother humming while she cleaned up. But every so often, they'd fall quiet for a moment, and one of them would look at Alana a little longer than usual, not with worry, but with awe. Because they had watched her go through something no teenager should have had to face. And she hadn't just come out of it, she had come through it. And grown. It was a Tuesday afternoon when her father finally said what she hadn't realized she'd been waiting to hear. They had just finished a short training session in the backyard. The light was golden. The birds were starting to return to the trees. He tossed her a towel, and she caught it easily. "You know," he said, wiping his hands, "I'm proud of you." She looked at him, her breath still catching from the drills. "For standing up," he added. "For walking back in." Alana didn't say anything right away. She just nodded, her throat tightening with something that felt more solid than tears. A few days later, the school announced the upcoming awards ceremony. She knew she'd be invited. The writing contest had placed her among the finalists. Her name would be called, applause would follow, but she didn't go for recognition. She went for closure. She sat quietly as names were called, hands clapped, speeches were made. When hers was announced, she walked to the stage calmly, accepted the certificate, and turned back, without any dramatic pause. But before she stepped down, she looked out over the crowd. She saw students, teachers, parents, people who knew her as more than a headline now, and maybe, finally, as just herself. That night, she placed the certificate in a drawer, next to the medal, next to her notebook. Not because she needed reminders, but because they belonged there, together. Proof that she had lost something and found herself, not by shouting, not by demanding attention, but by refusing to disappear. In today's fast-moving world, we often think injustice only shows up in loud protests or courtroom battles. But sometimes it happens in the quiet corners of a classroom, behind the calm voice of authority, and in the silence that follows when no one speaks up. Alana Pierce's story is a reminder that dignity can be chipped away not just by what is said, but by what is left unsaid. Many of us as parents, grandparents, former educators, have seen moments where young people are asked to stay silent, to endure, to be strong. But silence shouldn't be mistaken for resilience. The real strength came not from Alana enduring injustice, but from choosing to stand, to return, and to speak when it counted most. For those of us watching, it's a call to remember that our support, our listening, our presence can be the difference between a child breaking down or rising up. Because sometimes what they need most isn't a rescue. It's someone who simply believes them when they say, "This hurt me."